All right, we are here with Richard Bardon. He runs one of my favorite podcasts, Mad About Movies, with my friend Brian Gill, and he is a TV streaming expert. Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely, Mr. Simpson, a pleasure to be here. And this stuff's always fun to talk about. Brian's probably far more of a better critic than I am on the content, but I'm always more interested in the business side of these things and how they all work and build on top of each other. So, and I work in advertising and in my day job, so all this is very interesting and changing by the minute. So I think it'll be great.
Yeah, very cool. So let's take a look here. I've got a series of questions to go through with you. TV. I was born in '74, so I grew up with rabbit ears and with no remote, and getting cable in the early '80s and all of that stuff. What is TV to our culture?
I think obviously the comparison is to film, but the democratization that TV provided, meaning that everyone could have access to the same content at the same time and all of these things. It built, especially in this country, a real community because, there weren't a lot of options, and it kind of created a monoculture that everyone had access to, or at least a large swath of people had access to. And so it really created a new way. Going to the movies and things like that could be expensive. Going to theaters certainly be expensive, but a new, more affordable way for a average person to ingest, mass amounts of culture.
Yeah, it was free. I could just, once we got the rabbit ears, we got that hooked up, we could watch, and there was no cost to it at all. Of course, cable and stuff changed that, and we'll get to that here in a second. But it was like, you're right. I think it all gave it. If we weren't watching, Dukes of Hazzard on Friday night, if you weren't watching Webster, if you weren't watching Silver Spoons when I was a kid, those were like missed opportunities. You weren't part of the pop culture of what was happening. But once upon a time, there was a land that we lived in where there was just 3 networks, and it was ABC, NBC, and CBS. What happened?
Well, a lot of different things happened. These are what are called broadcasters. They were over-the-air broadcasters. What was great about that is that they could hit a broad market. If you notice things now, everything is much more. You're in these tiny little silos. Advertisers or whoever, content creators know that Mr. Simpson likes cats and he eats dinner at 3:30. And all, and they could tell you everything about yourself, right? It becomes very specific and very targeted. But these broadcasting, these 3 networks with the limited amount of options, really created a, like I talked about earlier, like a monoculture. We all, like you said, everyone watched. You look at these ratings, these shows that were like not even hits, that were canceled after 4 episodes would be 3 times the size of whatever the biggest show, Yellowstone, right? They'd be massive hits, and they were considered failures because if you weren't getting what we consider Super Bowl numbers now on Monday night, because again, 3 options, you were failing.
Right. And that's such a hard thing to think about. I think my students, they have they have the ability to watch anything they want. Like my kids, when they turn on Netflix or whatever, they have the ability to watch a show that is like 50 different versions of Saved by the Bell, and I had Saved by the Bell, and that was it. And it's like these kids they can really go any direction. When Squid Games comes up, it's a massive hit, but it's like you have these like specific shows that they can specifically generate to them, which I remember in the early 80s, my dad came home and said, here's the deal, we're going to get cable TV. I remember this thing called Sports Center that I saw that was solely highlights for a half hour. I remember when MTV came around and that song, "We're Not Gonna Take It." I remember my brother and I were dancing around, knocking over the lamp, and my mom was like threatening to kick cable out the door. Cable changed everything within the television landscape, did it not?
Yeah, the biggest, the internet is a bigger jump, but I think cable TV is definitely undersold as how revolutionary it was because it allowed people to find their niche. If you were into music, you could watch MTV. Yes, they played music back then. If you were into sports, like I was as a kid, you could watch I didn't have YouTube, right? I was born in '86. So like when I was a kid, there wasn't all these, the on demand of whatever. So I would just watch Sports Center on a loop, sometimes 3 times a night in the summer, just to like get my sports fix and things like that, because I was a sports fan, right? If you're into gardening, there was like HGTV. If you were into, it allowed, networks to solely target around one niche and for people to find those. And that was kind of the perfect balance, right? For still maintaining a culture where you could still assume that people kind of had a passing familiarity with what you do. Now, it's crazy. There's shows, even people that ingest this stuff, very seriously, you're going to miss out on shows because there's just such a quantity of things to watch.
And I tell you what, there's something lost there. Like, it's like you come to school and
Sure.
you're like, did you see Seinfeld last night? Or did you see Friends? Did you see whatever? And it's like,
Right.
we're all watching different things and we're all on different episodes too. So it's
Yeah.
like, there's just not a community water cooler sort of mentality, I think, to television anymore.
And we kind of force it. I mean, we force it with, like, if you look at something like like what gets big in like meme culture, something like Succession, big show, right, on HBO. Like, really, not a lot of people watch Succession, but it feels like a big mono hit because of all the things around it. We have to kind of artificially create that conversation.
Right.
Whereas in years past, it was much more organic because, yeah, like 5/6 of houses that had TVs on that night were watching Seinfeld. So it's like when you went to school, you knew that people had probably seen that. Now it's like, did you see that GIF? You know, it's like we kind of create things around those shows, kind of creates a bubble.
Right. And I think probably one of the most talked about, and this might be a little bit before your time to some degree here, is this sitcom. For me, I know sitcoms appeared before the 80s, but how would you properly define a sitcom? What is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's changed a bit over the years. I mean, now, I mean, what it means is situation comedy. So a fictional comedic show or with around a plot. What I think around a sitcom is a little more like technical based. So, you would think of something like Friends or Seinfeld or these shows, Cheers. It's the reason they were so successful is because they were highly lucrative because they're pretty cheap to produce, because you've got 2 sets, you set up 3 cameras. Really, your only expense are the actors, which we're making. These people made a ton of money, and actors love doing them because it's an awesome schedule. Yeah. It's like even doing 22 episodes of a sitcom, you're working like 3 days a week. You shoot on Friday. It's like doing a 22-minute play at school, and you're out and you're hanging out 5 days a week. Whereas you think of something like The Office, which is still technically a sitcom, but it's single camera. It's shot more like a movie or a documentary. That's a 6-day work week. Like that's just by the technical piece of making that. It's a much more realistic, and like, it's kind of weird watching sitcoms now because they feel like staged plays. But for like a production schedule, sitcoms, the reason they were so popular is they were just cash cows that were easy to do.
Yeah. It doesn't feel like any of my friends or students that I know of watch a sitcom, like, or
No.
like on a weekly basis. Is that industry sort of dead?
A bit. I mean, again, it comes down to your definition of it. There's some huge, comedies on the streamers that are massive, massive in today's terms, that do well, but they tend to be kind of 22-minute or even sometimes longer, short comedic films, right? They're not a traditional. Now, it's kind of crazy what we talk about in terms of the television business and things like that is it doesn't always mirror what really goes on. Meaning, like, the biggest show on television ratings wise is still NCIS, like it kills, right? But that's not really part of the cult. That's kind of like what our grandparents watch and stuff like that. So there are still sitcoms like Chuck Lorre on CBS just cranks out, all these sitcoms that people do still watch. But they don't really get in the zeitgeist of the culture like something like The Office or something would, right? Because they have maybe a younger demographic. People are talking about them. They're water cooler, things like that. Sitcoms now are still pretty good business for networks, but they're kind of disposable, right? They're what we got used to, what the Office really changed and Arrested Development really changed in sitcom world is it used to be a really tight storyline specific to that episode. So character A runs into character B, character B's mad, they solve it all within that 22 episodes, and then next week we're never going to mention it. What sitcoms started becoming and taking from dramas was a storyline that goes for a season or two, and you can't see episode 3 without having seen episode 2, and that's makes it a little harder for broadcasters because they're relying on people to watch things live. So they tend to go to the kind of more traditional sitcom model of just kind of these disposable joke factories, right? Those Chuck Lorre shows are just, there's no character development, there's nothing. It's just like joke, setup, joke. So it's just changed a bit.
Well, and it's almost like with the streaming services too, you have like a Schitt's Creek, or you have like Curb Your Enthusiasm, where there's a storyline going through all of it. But then again, it's hard for me to talk to my friend about it because I'm on episode 12 and he is on episode 5. And like, I don't want to give away jokes that maybe hasn't heard yet. Like the sitcom of the 80s, really, in looking here, like, these sitcoms I'm going to show you here, they were ones where we all would come in on, to school or whatever, and we'd all seen these different shows. Why do you think they dominated television in the way they did in the 80s?
I think because, it can be sometimes these things are like really tactical and basic. Like it wasn't possible to shoot, you had to shoot on film or you had to shoot on videotape. There was not like digital cameras. And so, the advent of like a digital camera that you can throw on a shoulder and shoot in a room in a real set and make a sitcom like The Office, you couldn't do that in 1987. You had to have the big honking thing that was on wheels. So then all of your decisions are like, it's got to be on a set that looks like a play that's very 2D. Sometimes the answer to these questions are like really production oriented.
Yeah.
But also I think the people's, comedy, as comedy got like better and more nuanced, and you look at some of these shows that are so, they're not waiting on the audience to catch up. That's great if you're into that show. If you're into something like Schitt's Creek, that's like a really niche show that people do love. But that show is like kind of high concept and you kind of have to follow it from the beginning. It's hard to come in halfway. And with the old broadcast shows, when there weren't streamers or on demand or YouTube, highlight reels or things like that, you had to kind of dumb it down for the audience. So those shows, and a lot of them were really smart in the way they dumbed it down to be broad. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but like now that seems cheesy to the audience if you're doing that, to a lot of watchers.
Yeah, I mean, when I watched the Cosby Show, I didn't have to know what Theo did the week before,
right?
To know what's going to happen this week.
Absolutely.
It's like these shows now. Now, how do you think the '90s? When looking at sitcoms as well,
Mhm.
how do you think the '90s sort of changed some of that? I mean, I show a picture here of Seinfeld, which is very, it built to some degree, but for most part, every episode was pretty much unique. Yeah. It didn't. There was no like. There's no plot device where we had to learn a lesson or anything. Like, was that a trope within the '90s, or was that specific only to Seinfeld?
I mean, Seinfeld's really revolutionary that way. They had the motto like no lessons, no hugs, right? No, there's everything is just about being funny, and we're not here to teach you that it's bad to bully or anything like that. In fact, the funny thing about Seinfeld when you watch it now is like these are four horrible people.
Right.
Like, they're just vile human beings with no morality. But they're funny, so you like them, right? That's pretty revolutionary thing. Yes, you're right. I think just in general, you look at things across music, like with grunge rock, or you look with things in the '90s television. Letterman was a huge part of this, where irony starts to come in more, and it's like we were kind of tired as a culture of a Family Ties, where we learn a lesson, or all that. What we want something that kind of works against that, and these things are very cyclical. You look at something like Parks and Rec. Later, 10 years after Seinfeld or whatever, when it starts, that's a really sweet show, and it's not necessarily like teaching you lessons, but like coming back to cyclical, that's a show about like morality and being ethical and still funny and all these things. But these things kind of come in, whatever we're feeling as kind of a mass society. Okay, I'm rolling my eyes at being sweet. I want someone that's mean. Now I'm tired of being mean for mean's sake. Show me Leslie Knope and show me some happiness. These are just normal things.
So what were your favorite shows then in the '90s? What were your favorite sitcoms of the '90s?
Yeah, favorite sitcoms of the '90s. It's funny. My wife and I still watch a lot of '90s sitcoms, like before we go to bed, because they're just kind of mindless, whatever. So I, like I said, I was born in '86, so I was kind of a kid. So I loved like Home Improvement because there were kids on that show. You watch Home Improvement now, it's not very funny anymore. It doesn't hold up to 35-year-old me. Seinfeld was a big one. Friends was huge. That kind of bridges the '90s to 2000s. The one that I love that we watch all the time, that I can't say I watched as a kid too much because it was a little like highbrow for me, is Frasier. Frasier's like a classic farce. Like it could take place in any decade ever and be funny.
Right.
Just brilliant, really, really smart writing. That one holds up really well. And then, it was crazy. And then I was a kid. So there was this thing called TGIF, which was like kind of like teen sitcom. So it'd be like Full House and Family Matters, and Boy Meets World was a big one. It was like very much the same tropes of an adult sitcom, but like in a high school and kind of a little sweeter, and maybe they don't curse or something.
Right.
So it's crazy that these networks would dedicate, again, because they were cheap, would have, they'd have football on Sunday, dramas, maybe one or two nights, and then every other night would be sitcoms. Well, from Central Time 7 to 9, like just loaded back to back to back to back. If one didn't work, it's canceled. Bring another one in. I mean, it was, again, because it was the way to do it.
That Thursday night NBC lineup was just like a murderer's row too.
Absolutely, murderer's row.
It had, when you had Friends, and then you had some show that they were trying to get off the ground in the middle. Then you had Seinfeld, and then it's something else. Then you had ER. I mean, it was like Thursday night television if you weren't tuning into to NBC, you were missing
Yeah,
out. Why can't
absolutely.
they
And
do that? Why can't they do that these days?
I think it's, again, because everything's so niche. I think it's a great point. And it's that thing too of, and they do game this a bit. They'll put things up on Hulu or on their own on demand or Peacock or whatever if it's NBC. So you can maybe give you the chance to catch up. But also just the economics of a network is if they're going to do a sitcom, they need to make 22 of them because, and that's just a beat down, right? Because then you're so far behind. You watch a lot of these shows. We were talking about this on our show. We did an Office retrospective, and Office kind of ended right before the streaming revolution, right? And it was like in this kind of in between era where it was like most people like DVR'd it at the time.
Right.
You recorded it, you still had TV, but you recorded it on your TV. And you watch those last two seasons of The Office post Michael Scott, and you go, this isn't as bad as I remember it, but it'd be really probably pretty good at 10 episodes per season, but they had to do 24.
Right.
So they have to stretch everything out and have all this boring stuff. And unless you have a character like Steve Carell, just that's kind of driving the ship, it's hard to do that.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just a hard thing to do. And, if you're going to shoot things like movies, which is how we want things done now, it's a lot more sitcoms now aren't that financially viable. It's way easier just do a game show or a reality show that's way cheaper to make because you don't have to pay, you can
Right.
you can pay these people 20 grand an episode, which sounds like a lot of money, but Steve Carell was making $1 million an episode for The Office at the end. So it's just, a lot of things just come down to economics.
So what about laugh tracks? It seems like laugh tracks are no longer part of our show. I mean, how did that ever come to where people thought we need to tell the audience when to laugh? Like, why was that a thing? And why isn't it a thing anymore?
I think it comes to, I mean, I'm not trying to be like the most basic answers, but it's like a lot of times people's speakers were just kind of bad on their TVs. Yeah. And they really wanted to create that, like because these are sitcoms, especially were based on like vaudeville plays, going to see a little thing. And so they really wanted to create the atmosphere that you're there and ha 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 ha.
Right.
And they were also built to be watched with your whole family around the television where you're all laughing with this invisible audience, things like that. And then it became a trope where like you would really pound the joke home. Also, like it started, I think I'm right about this. It started organically because all these things, a lot of these shows were shot live back in like the 50s. So that laugh that is really just the studio audience. So people got used to that laugh.
Right.
And then they stopped shooting in front of a studio audience, or at least not as often. So then they would just add it in artificially. And then we kind of, once you don't have it on something like, I'm trying to think the first shows that didn't. Arrested Development probably is the first one I can think of. Larry Sanders Show in the 90s. And then it became like kind of a sign of bad comedy that if there's a laugh track, it's not funny, which isn't. There's shows with laugh tracks that are still funny, but it was kind of like the hip thing to not have one.
Right. I mean, Seinfeld has it, and it's like, and my kids now watch, all their Disney shows have laugh tracks. It's like, oh, it just kills me. I can still stomach Seinfeld with it, but it's like their stuff. So tell me the 2000s, we changed, we stopped getting away from the laugh tracks. We start doing some more of the highbrow kind of comedy. Stories are woven together. Pam and who was the other guy on The Office?
Jim and Pam.
Jim and Pam. I mean, you have these like, these woven storylines and all that stuff. What were some of the biggest shows other than maybe The Office and Parks and Rec to you in the 2000s?
It became cool later on. It certainly wasn't cool when I was watching it. I was hip to Arrested Development early. That one kind of broke my brain with how like it was the first show I ever saw. It's like, yes, there is a joke in the foreground. Two characters are talking and making a joke, but there are 6 things happening back here that are also funny. And if you watch it 6 times, and also things started to get more into there was suddenly with this market for DVDs on these box sets. And so people were like building things to be rewatched and watched and have a narrative plot, because even network show like The Office early on, there's no streaming, but they were much more comfortable to have a linear plot go through multiple episodes like Jim and Pam, because they know, okay, even if you don't get this or you miss one or whatever, you can buy the DVD this summer and watch the whole thing like a movie. That was kind of the kind of in-between zone between broadcast TV and now streaming. And those are huge business for those shows. I mean, even shows that weren't doing that, people forget The Office until pretty much the end there was not a very highly rated show, but it got saved for 2 reasons. Carell did 40-Year-Old Virgin and suddenly became a movie star. And they were like, okay, we can have this guy on TV once a week. Great. He's locked in. And 2, iTunes. People used to buy episodes on iTunes, and they were like, this show, no one is really watching it, but it's making more money than big shows because, 100,000 people, which is not a whole lot of people, are paying $2.99 for an episode on Friday when it hits iTunes. And so that's what saved it. And then it grew an audience from there.
Interesting. So turning to a more serious, type of shows here, we have the drama type shows. How does it differentiate from a sitcom, and why do you think it gets such great ratings?
People like a good story, not unlike I know we're going to talk about prestige dramas kind of in a second, which is a different thing, but these are not unlike, even though there's no laugh track and they're an hour long as opposed to 30 and et cetera, et cetera. They also, the dramas of the 80s and 90s, these long, and going back to Gunsmoke and things like that, even earlier than that, is that they are contained story. So I basically can read a short story when I can come in on an episode of ER and I think George Clooney's guy, all right, he's a nice doctor. I know that's all I know, and I'm still fine. This person comes in with this disease, they're diagnosed, there's some drama, and and people love that. They still like that. Those shows still rate really well. Like I said, the biggest show right now is like NCIS. The CSI shows do really well. People like to come in, as much as people love something like Succession or, Breaking Bad, these incredible, they're basically 40-hour movies.
Right.
They also like being like, all right, I'm just coming in. They're going to investigate a murder. That's all I need to know.
Right. I remember the first time, I think it was Hill Street Blues. There was either a nudity scene where it was like a rear end of somebody, or they said a swear word. And it just felt like it was during the 80s that they felt like they were pushing boundaries. It was no longer just the simple, hey, show up and watch this drama for an hour. It was like, we got to be a little edgy, a little controversial. Is that really take off in the 80s, or maybe was that a 90s thing?
It was more of a 90s thing, but you're right. Hill Street Blues was a revolutionary show, which is hilarious looking at this picture you have of it, because it seems so quaint. But the biggest thing it did was and this seems really simple, but it wasn't at the time. It's we're going to respect our audience. Meaning we're just going to assume that you're smart and you can figure this out. And we're not going to have this dumb exposition dialogue where we explain who things are. We're not going to be afraid to be as edgy as we can be on network TV. We're just going to assume you are an adult who has a job, that has sat down on whatever that was on Wednesday night at 9:00, and you're welcome, and we're going to have some quality actors on it. Not everyone's got to be handsome and the jocular cool cop or things like that. It's no. Yeah, gritty, just Dennis Franz, just deal with it. And so, it was revolutionary, I think, in the way that it respected its audience.
What shows in the 90s? I know you were still a teenager during that time, but what were there any dramas that drew you in the 90s?
Man, not a bit. I mean, a little more later on. I was a comedy nerd as a kid, so I didn't really care. I mean, I watched ER, because my parents watched ER, and I watched. There, Law and Orders were on periodically. That was a big one. Again, single contained episode, really easy to go through. But I wasn't. Yeah, I wasn't a big. I was going to watch sports or something at 9:00 when the dramas came on, or 2020 or something.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and then all of a sudden, I mean, HBO had been trying for years, I think, to maybe put on shows that really pushed the envelope.
Yep.
You had Our List, you had other shows that were either comedy or drama based that were all good. But man, The Sopranos, when they came along, it felt like, okay, if you don't have an HBO, if you're not a member of that, if you don't have that, then that's going to be a problem. What did The Sopranos do, and how did that change television?
Well, it was film quality work, everything from the writing. There used to be this thing, this is different, this is something that's important to talk about. There used to be this actual difference between television writing and film writing. Now everything's the same. The only difference is one's 2 hours and one's 10. And oftentimes the television stuff's of better quality, because movies now are built to get people to look at explosions in a theater together.
Right.
Sopranos was really The Wire, a few other things were the first to bridge that gap and say, we're going to have film quality writing, film quality directing. It's going to look and feel like a movie. Film quality acting. We're going to get really great actors doing this. We're going to have violence. We're going to swear. There's going to be nudity. It's like watching Goodfellas, but it's a television show, and we're only going to make 10 a year. Or 10 every 2 years, maybe, because it's we can't do 22 of these. It's not ER. These are going to be quality. And by the way, do all of that and be good, like be entertaining to where we can have a really big audience. People will get HBO. And HBO started to it started just as home box office, right? It was movies, first run movies before they kind of hit Blockbuster or whatever,
Yeah.
after they left theaters, and boxing. That was
Yeah.
all that was on there.
Right.
And
Right.
then they were smart. I mean, they're an interesting company. Much like Netflix before, later on, they pivoted. They were, we talk all the time. There's all these streaming and content providers and all these things. They're always behind the curve. That like Disney sold all their stuff to Netflix, right? And didn't see that in 5 years we would like to have our own streaming platform, and they had to buy it all and wait and get it all back, right?
Yeah.
They went for short-term money. HBO was really ahead of its time to pivot. They still have movies on there during the day, but it's like, hey, at night we need to have shows,
Right.
to make us different than Showtime and Stars and all these things that were coming that just had movies.
Yeah, I mean, I remember Band of Brothers coming out and being
Yeah.
like, okay, I've never seen. I mean, I Saving Private Ryan had just come out. Like, this Band of Brothers looks just as good, if not better, in some scenes than
Right.
Saving Private Ryan did. And I remember too with The Sopranos, like I was behind. I was like 2 seasons behind. I had to go to my local Blockbuster.
Mhm.
I had to rent the VHS because I didn't have a DVD player still. And I literally, that was the first show I ever binged. I remember like.
Yeah.
I just was watching all these episodes. People were like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm watching all these episodes." There wasn't the term for binging a show. Like,
Right.
that just wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
I finally got caught up, and then you couldn't miss when the new thing was going to come out. It
Sure.
became Water Cooler Talk about
Yeah.
it as well. But in looking here, turning a little bit here to the reality based shows, it really feels like, I mean, there were always game shows. There were always sort of things that were, based on reality to some degree, but the real world felt like it was really
Yeah.
the first show where I was watching people like myself in the 90s. I was a college student in the 90s and watching all
big
these
puck energy. Yeah.
Yeah, Puck energy, right? And and so, what did this show do other than take videos off the TV for us? What
Yeah.
did Real World do?
Well, a lot of things. I mean, it was definitely the forerunner to all the reality shows we have now, especially in the States. We're pretty good at importing reality shows in America. Like, we think everything's original to us, and then it's always some other country thinks of reality shows before us. But Real World was kind of organic. And it invented, these reality shows now, they're very produced. And because they know what works, they know that, like, okay, we've got to have 3 storylines going on, and this person needs to be in conflict with this person. They either force that in. Sometimes it's obvious that there's like some acting going on, or they edit it to make it look, to create all that. The Real World was the first one to kind of invent all those tropes organically, because they actually happened, at least the first couple seasons. Then it became as self-aware as anything else, and kind of, you have people saying, hey, these 2 people hate each other. Why don't you guys go talk? So, but it was really revolutionary. And again, I hate to keep bringing everything back, but all you kids out there, to answer to all of your questions in life, it's always money. They're cheap. They're just cheap to make. You need like 3 camera guys, a boom mic, and a bunch of not famous people that you don't have to pay anything, and a house. And it's like, that seems like a lot. I probably wouldn't want to front 3 months at a house for 9 people, but in the scheme of producing television, when you can sell ads, MTV can sell 15 ads on that show at $100K each. That's it's just straight cash, homie. Just super profitable. Yep.
Yeah. And it's funny. It's like, just put people in a house and have them live together and film them, and stuff's going to happen. Like, it's like, we're just such drama creatures that
absolutely,
like, we can't just live together and, I eat your peanut butter and you're mad at me or whatever. And it's like this just dumb stuff that comes up. But then again, 2000 rolls around here, and we get this show called Survivor that kind of comes in. I remember seeing the first episode being like, this is the greatest show I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It feels like Survivor turned a corner in reality world, where it was like, wasn't so campy like the Real World was. It was very, like, I don't know, it just felt much more strategic and interesting and woven. What did Survivor do for reality television?
Well, it kind of combined, before that, there was like the game shows like Wheel of Fortune, and then there was the Real World. And this kind of combined the game show element, which people do like, with a reality show element. And again, it was, and they could just throw up hours and hours and hours of it. People were just obsessed with it. Again, cash cows. You don't have to pay these people anything. You have to pay one person $1 million. Awesome.
Right.
And it was just a really, really you're right. The strategy of it really caught people. It became kind of sports for people that maybe didn't like sports. It's kind of like
Yeah.
my wife is still a big Survivor fan
I'm too.
and a big Brother fan. And
Yeah.
Big Brother runs from like whatever July to October,
Yeah.
and she always is like, "This is my sports. This is like what you when you just want to go watch games. Like this is what I And it was funny during COVID, the first COVID, 2020. I'm a huge basketball fan, and it all got delayed, and it was like it ran the NBA playoffs ran right along with Big Brother. And so like my wife and I in our house were like in separate rooms for 3 months
Right.
and barely saw each other because we had our respective sports going on.
Amazing Race and Survivor are
Mhm.
probably the only two shows that my wife and I actually watch, like that are
Yeah,
like our shows together. Like we love both of those shows. Everything else is really kind of, my wife loves this reality show, this Real Housewives. Any of these shows she likes. Why does my wife like shows like that? Like this or the Kardashians or these other
sure.
shows?
Well, I can't speak to your wife specifically, but I can say generically, I think, look, it's aspirational wealth. It's fun. We all like watching wealthy people. I
Yeah.
mean, we all, it's always fascinating to us. Um, and these shows, everyone always kind of scoffs at something like Real Housewives. And I'm always like, well, it's to me, it's the it scratches, it's different looking, it's presented differently, but it scratches the exact same itch for people as like General Hospital did for 40
Yeah.
years. I mean, they're just soap operas. They're presented as real. Whether they are or not is a different argument, but who cares? They just scratch that like, and she's your father, itch that people had, watching All My Children or Guiding Light or these shows
All right.
that were so I'm never that surprised by. I think they're just the postmodern, slightly more self-aware version of soaps.
Why does my father-in-law love Duck Dynasty so much? I mean, what is with these types of shows that have gotten people that just watch episode after episode of these things? I mean, I know they all seem like they're impromptu, just hilarious people, but it feels scripted. I mean,
Yeah.
it just does. But why does my father-in-law love this show so much?
Well, there's a lot of things on that too. You're right. I have the exact same experience with a lot of those shows going, this doesn't feel real. And I know people that are like reality show writers, and so I can kind of tell you that it's not. But um
Do they write the script for Duck Dynasty, guys?
I don't, not for Duck Dynasty, but yeah, I mean, there's a reality TV. All you know is there's a writers union for reality TV. So, not to try to burst anyone's bubble, there's some professional wrestling element there on some shows. Some
Right.
shows are more real than others. Duck Dynasty, I think, is an interesting one. I think we do have part a lot of this country is not represented on shows, right? And it's like every show I watch, they're in New York or Los Angeles or
Right.
some kind of glamour. They're in an urban environment, even if it's. And so I think some people really want to just see something different, And so I know a little bit about Duck Dynasty, but it's like a kind of a wealthy but down home family that's like kind of has traditional values and but has a lot of money making duck calls or something, right?
Right.
I think there's just people that want to see that on TV because they don't feel like that's been represented enough in the culture.
And by the way, some of my friends who I go to church with, I'm a Christian, and they watch Duck Dynasty, or they back in the day when it was so big, and it almost felt like, well, there's a nice wholesome show that's for Christian, and I'm like, well, I just don't think it's very good. Like, am I
Yeah, sure.
anti-Christian to be like, I don't think this show's very good? Like, I almost felt like I was under religious attack because I didn't want to watch these guys,
Yeah.
shooting stuff and doing whatever they were doing out in the woods. My father-in-law was like, this is a really good one. He'd seen them all like several times. I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
God. Like,
Some people are more like seeing their tribe represented. But it's not necessarily a bad. It's like, some people are going to watch every Padres game, whether they're good or bad,
Go
right?
Pods. That's right.
Yeah. And some people are going to be like, yeah, we'll see if they're sniffing around first place. I'll watch, And so some people have a bigger quality buffer than others.
Yeah.
But some people are like, no, you're right. I'm the same religion as these people. I have a beard and I live on 14 acres. I don't care if this is bad or not. I'm going to like it. And that's fine. It's different. Different people have different thresholds for that, I think.
So when it comes to premium television, how I think when you ask most people, what's the number one maybe show that you would, have a subscription to on top of your direct TV or whatever, HBO has been coming to mind for a long time. Why has HBO been sort of the leader in that niche industry?
I think they had really smart and continue to have really smart curators of of making quality. As we get into more of these now like streamers, a lot of times it's like software people, people that are at a software company like an Apple that then get into the entertainment business, which is great. They're really smart people and they'll figure it out or they'll hire the right people to figure it out. But
Yeah.
HBO just has all of this currency of they've been doing it forever. They have really smart people at the network that know how to read scripts and go, this will be good. Give this one $100 million. Let's go make it.
Yeah.
It's crazy the shows that HBO has had that are huge that were like not only just hits, but like really like classics and so well done
Mhm.
that were like turned down by like CBS. So because they were really smart they kind of walked the line well, I think, in letting artists, really smart writers and showrunners um, have the freedom to make the show they want to make, but not just throw money at them. And like Apple right now is like, here's $50 million, just go make this, and we have no notes because we make phones. Whereas HBO is kind of walks that line well of like, go make this. We believe in you. We're going to back you. We are going to have our thoughts that help you along the way and our process that help you along the way and producers that will help you along the way. They just have always been really good at that.
Yeah, and they've recently partnered. They partnered with HBO Max as well, and like, I mean, like a show like Station 11. I mean, like I've been watching that. It's like it's just such a revelation.
Yeah.
Like, why? How are they always on the front end of these Game of Thrones, of these Curb Your Enthusiasm, of like these shows that like I will sometimes let my HBO lapse, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't let it lapse. I've got to go back into the show. I can't miss that. How are they so good at that?
It's funny when I think the thing we look at the least is they just have, when people are throwing ideas and pitching to you all the time, first off, really smart people want to work with HBO because you want to work. If you're a really innovative showrunner, HBO is going to be the first place you want to go and have a meeting because of the legacy of The Sopranos and Game of Thrones and all this stuff. And then they just have great taste. They know what like when they have and they don't make a lot of stuff like some networks do, but when they had a flop a couple years ago, I can't even remember what it was. It's like, oh wow, it's actually surprising. Like their batting average is so, like that show's not very good.
Right.
Their eye for quality and their taste and not only the projects they choose, but obviously their ability. It's like, again, to bring it back to sports, not only are they really good at drafting players essentially with shows, but they're really good at developing those players and, getting them a jump shot if they don't have one and getting them and knowing, what young comedian to have write a show and what young drama writer that they want to, and they'll come in, give them a lot of money and let them make the show they want to make.
Yeah, and it's like a show like Vinyl a couple years ago. I remember it was like,
yeah,
it wasn't reviewed well. I actually liked it. I thought it was okay. I didn't think it was terrible, but it like got so like people just hated it. I remember thinking like this show's pretty good. It's better than what's on most things right now.
Yeah, exactly. If that show's on AMC or something, it's probably like more well regarded, but it's going to be graded against the legacy of HBO for sure.
So what does Showtime have to do? I mean, how do they become number one over HBO?
Oh wow! It's funny. They are aligned with what makes them different from CBS. Pardon me, from HBO is that they are aligned with Viacom, which is CBS and MTV and Comedy Central and all those things. That's their premium outlet. It's really interesting. I don't know. I think that kind of Viacom Paramount relationship. Paramount now is putting a lot of the shows that may have been Showtime shows, like Mayor of Easttown, I think it's called.
Yeah.
That's now on Paramount Plus. So they kind of have too many, they're too spread out. So I don't really know what Showtime does. I think as people get rid of cable, you now have to kind of set yourself up, which HBO has done really well as an independent, streaming platform. And Showtime's done that a bit. I know they have an app and things like that, but if I had to guess what happens to Showtime is that they get rolled into Paramount Plus at some point and it just becomes a single experience. So that would help, I think, both brands.
So is it similar maybe to what is happening to Cinemax? I mean, Cinemax was known for a long time for some inappropriate movies or whatever. Yeah. And, and now they're rolled in together with HBO. Yeah. What does that mean is that just more for me as a consumer?
Yeah, I think Cinemax as a production arm is pretty much over. What that they always were, the same as part of that Time Warner family with HBO. But I think, they just rolled it into a single over the top streaming service. So they basically just got all the back, instead of making that differentiation, there used to be like, HBO movies and Cinemax movies. And I mean that in traditional movies as well, not just the the late night stuff.
Yeah.
But they now that's just over, and they just have all the bought that back catalog, and it's all in one place in HBO Max, and let's go try to take on Netflix.
Does Stars just know who it is? Like, I mean, I love Spartacus. Like, I'm
Yeah,
sorry, I don't even, I shouldn't even apologize for it, but I like Spartacus. I like some of these shows that were not particularly well received, but they're loud, they're obnoxious, they
sure,
are what they are. Is that okay?
sure. I mean, Stars, that they used to have pretty good movie lineup, and then they really tried to brand themselves as just movies, and they kind of got into TV shows, what we think of as TV shows now later. So I think that set them back. I don't think they're not nearly as well funded as something like HBO. So I think their move is to say we have a niche audience of like dude shows, like loud, violent shows like Spartacus, and we're just going to crank those out until whenever. But I think that the clock is ticking on Stars, not because of the quality of their shows, but because they're really aligned with traditional cable, right? And as a premium,
Right.
they haven't really been able to. Yeah, they may have an over the top app, but they don't market it much. And so I would think probably at some point, these things will consolidate a bit, and someone will just kind of buy the Stars library and say, thanks,
They
you're
used
now
to put
on
it on
Netflix.
Netflix. It used to be on
Yeah,
Netflix, and that's where I saw Spartacus as well. I never had a subscription at all. But then again, here you go. I mean, people are
yep.
cutting the cord, and obviously, we know it's cost. Like that is
Mhm.
clearly the number one reason. Why else are people cutting the cord?
The quality's not there. It's kind of a chicken or the egg thing. As more and more people cut the cord, there's less money for these networks, so these networks make less quality shows. And it used to be too, you had no other option. It was like I either have cable or I sit in a dark room alone and read a Hemingway novel or something. And now it's like I can pay $200 a month for a DirecTV, or and that's great. And there's a ton of stuff on it. Or I can pay $30 a month for HBO Max and Netflix and have probably better shows whenever I want, and I'd still be very much entertained. And I'll miss out on maybe some live sports, but I can figure that out.
Yeah.
And or news, I can figure that out. And yeah, why wouldn't I? If it was $150 for Netflix and HBO versus 200, I'd have more of a conversation, but I can't even justify this. The $200 a month for cable seemed normal until there was another option.
Right. In fact, for me, I went full circle. I was I was DirecTV guy. I cut the cord. I went to streaming only. Just hit my head against the wall trying to watch sports. Drove me crazy. We went back and got DirecTV again. I mean, I probably spend $250 a month between my
Yeah.
DirecTV and all of the subscriptions that we have to all of these random things. But I love all of it, and I don't want to have to be like, oh, should satellite companies, and by the way, when I cut the cord the first time and I went to the mailbox, et cetera, or whatever down in South Lake, and I handed them the box, and they said, oh yeah, okay, well they knew the exact process. I said, why do you get a lot of these? They go, we get about 20 of those a day. And there
Yeah.
were people cutting cords and that was like 10 years ago. And it was incredibly, should these companies be worried? I remember the DirecTV had like a big ad campaign with Tony Romo and like Dish
Yep.
Network. I mean, they spent lots of money for advertising. Should they be worried?
Yeah, I think they should. I think, they're lucky right now, that there's things like, for instance, a lot of other than the NFL, which is always kind of on broadcast or with ESPN and things like that. Hockey, basketball, and baseball are kind of locked into these deals for the next couple of years with our with what are called RSNs, right? Which are regional sports networks, something like Bally or Fox Sports Southwest.
Which I
Uh,
hate. Oh,
yeah, and so they're locked in on these things, right? And so honestly, and that's gonna change, right? Because it's gonna be more lucrative for, like, say, the NBA. Whenever that deal's up, which I think is like 2025, 2024, they're definitely gonna go, all right, we're getting rid of that, and we're just gonna sell an NBA app for $200 a year, league pass, basically, like they do now. But you'll be able to get your local team, which you can't currently do. They will black that out. So, I mean, I think that will be a real, because a lot of people have, um, cable just for sports.
yeah.
And so
Hey,
just for news, right? And there's There's now, even you see it with like Fox Nation or whatever, has like a just streaming version of Fox News that you can pay whatever, $5 a month for or whatever. And so I think really what the cable companies are now are middlemen. And they're, streamers figured out ways around them.
Yeah.
And they're gonna, and sports are going to next. They would love to right now. Unfortunately, they signed 10-year deals 10 years ago or 8 years
Right.
ago. And so that will change as those deals come up, because quite frankly, all those streamers too are looking for any advantage they can have on each other, because they're in this battle to chase Netflix down. And Amazon might just pay $2 billion to have the NBA and
Yeah.
say, yeah, done. Or $10 billion, whatever it is. I mean,
Yeah.
they've got it.
Right.
So, I mean, there's that is kind of the scripted stuff has all gone to streaming. I think the live, and you see it now with like Peacock and Paramount Plus. I'm a big
Right.
soccer guy. They've got Champions League and Premier League, mixed in there with a huge traditional catalog of scripted shows, but they also have live streaming sports right there. And I wouldn't be surprised if Netflix does too in 5 years.
It's interesting, when I polled my students to ask them how many of them saw Spider-Man, majority of my classes all saw it. When I polled them again and asked them, where did you see advertisements for it? None of them saw them on television.
Sure.
They were playing in front of social media apps or on YouTube or different places. What does cord cutting mean to advertising? How does this change their strategy?
That's what I do for a living is what's called digital experience strategy. So I work at an agency, and I work with a bunch of clients on their digital strategy, and that's already kind of over. That's kind of, because mass pop advertising, shotgun style. Hey, let's throw an ad on ABC at 7:30. It is pretty cheap. It's much cheaper now than it used to be, but it's just not nearly as great as the great thing about digital advertising is you only spend money on like people that are likely to see Spider-Man.
Right.
So because I've got this Epsilon data set, I can tell you the exact type of profile with 80% accuracy that's already kind of predetermined to be interested in a Spider-Man movie.
Yeah.
And these other 20% of people are never gonna, so let's even show them the ad. Let's show them an ad for a knitting show. And so I mean, the advertising is already gotten so much more targeted that way and so much more intelligent. And it ends up being better deal for the brands because they're able to they're not wasting money on the 15 people that went to the bathroom during the commercial on ABC at 7:30.
So does Nielsen ratings, are they dead? Does it even matter anymore?
It matters. It does for certain shows. I mean, Nielsen's crazy the way they still do things. I mean, it's like 1975. It's like people literally with like a notebook writing down what they watched and things like that. I think it does on certain shows. I think it still matters to something like NCIS, right? They're still going to sell that. I think it matters with sports,
right?
That are still on that. But now for a lot of shows, even things that may have a first run on, NBC, they're much more interested in, yes, the Nielsen ratings is kind of a holistic part of it. That's 20%. How many people watched it on demand? How many people DVR'd it? And then when we showed it on Hulu on 2 weeks later, how many people streamed it? And
they can check that I DVR'd their show and watched it.
Oh yeah. They know. Yeah. Now they can, especially it's all digital. It tags all that. So, and that counts as, that's less, right? That's worth less to an advertiser.
Yeah. That's there's no way I'm watching the commercial if I DVR'd that.
Right. But they have kind of a holistic score they'll put together based on all of those behaviors. And then that's whether that they renew the show or not, or how much money that show gets, et cetera.
Interesting. Well, back in the early 2000s, I was one of those people who got Netflix in the mail and I loved it. I still had a DVD of it coming until about 2016. I think Brian even mentioned me on your show once. I was that guy. But I had a little DVD player and stuff that's inappropriate. My kids would walk through the living room and I can't watch that. So the only place I could watch it was on my little thing. Now I just rent it on Amazon Prime or whatever. But how did Netflix beat the behemoth, the giant, the gorilla Blockbuster? They owned rentals.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a multi-factor story. I think there's a lot of stories about how Blockbuster could have bought Netflix like 6 times for very little money and all that. But yeah, I mean, they were able to. The first thing was that you could have a membership that was like revolutionary, that you could pay whatever it was at the time, $10 a month, and basically get unlimited movies as long as you turn the one back in via the mail. I don't know if it was the convenience of the mail as much as that, because Blockbuster at that point was getting up to $5-6 for a DVD rental. And so if you were a serious person, and keep in mind, kiddos, there was no streaming or anything yet. So like people rented a lot of movies and a lot of TV shows. Like I said, the DVD box set was a big thing. So people were dropping some serious money. And if you could kind of have dropping $6 for 2 hours at home. And if I could, oh, you mean I can just return this and then 2 days later click a button and get another one sent to me really quickly?
Right.
That was a huge deal. And Blockbuster just kind of scoffed at that. The other thing is Netflix was a really effective software company. The logistics of mailing the disc was great too, but like it was the first time that someone really nailed the user interface where they learned what I liked. That was a really that was a big deal. And also it was like easy to browse, because the fun part about Blockbuster, all of you students in your class, which are young to remember this, but like you'd go there not knowing what you wanted most of the time, and then just kind of walk around and look at stuff. Oh, it's cool. Read the back there. And they kind of gave for the first time that digital experience to people on the web. And it was just and we became much more comfortable. Amazon was brilliant too. Amazon plays a factor in this because people were kind of tepid, which is bizarre to think about these days, but like people were tepid about having stuff shipped to their house. Pay with a credit card online, and that's why Amazon was so smart to just start with books, because it's like the perfect price point. Always knowing that one day we'd like to get where we're shipping you a sofa on Amazon,
Right.
but we can't start there because you're never going to give us an $800 credit card number, for charge and expect me to, and then wait for it to show up on your doorstep. Right. Let's get you comfortable. Take a couple years, order a book a month, and just let us show you how good this process is and how reliable it is. And God forbid it doesn't show up. Well, we'll refund you. Don't worry about it. And it got people comfortable with that process, along with Netflix, the disc coming in the mail.
Yeah.
And then, as you can see with Amazon, it just becomes more and more. And now they ship you whatever you want. And it's totally learned behavior as a consumer. We expect that, but it wasn't expected even as recently. I'm not even kidding. It's like 2004, 2005. I mean, not that long ago. But yeah, Netflix it's just really smart about creating a good experience. They're a really great software company that now is a media company, but they started really as just a software company with a warehouse.
Yeah. And it's interesting because like when they went to adding streaming, like you could go on and get stuff, the content was terrible. And like, I think that like my students don't really, they know it now as it's got Squid Games, it's got all these great, all the shows that are very specific to them. They just bought content, and it was some pretty terrible movies for a long time there. How did they go from the DVD per mail to streaming and still be able to get ahead of everybody?
Like Amazon, they were the first to kind of give you that streaming experience. I remember logging into that for the first time and seeing the library of stuff. Oh, this is kind of cool. I can watch this on my devices, my computer, things like that. And then they were really smart, and they just outsmarted all of these media companies because they thought like a software company. They thought like a business. Yeah. And they're like, okay, what are we good at? What are we bad at? All right, we're pretty bad at making stuff right now because we don't know how to do that. We don't know who to even talk to, how to make a quality show. It's hard to do. It's harder than it looks. What do we know how to do? Well, if we just raise a bunch of money and like literally run $100 million in debt, who cares? Let's just buy everyone's stuff. So let's go to Disney and say, here's $100 million for stuff you've already made that you haven't even thought about.
Right.
And Disney's like, done. Like, this is all just sitting on a shelf and people buy it on DVDs. We'll take the streaming rights for the next 8 years. Here's $100 million. And then let's go to ESPN and buy like all 30 for 30s for like $100,000 each. So that's not that, $3 million. And now we have all these great sports documentaries. And let's go to WB and say we'd like the Harry Potters for 70 million. And then all of a sudden, and they were smart on two factors. One, doing that, and all these media companies they're like, sure, we don't have a streamer. The streaming rights, of course you can have that. They all got, 4 years into that 8-year deal, Disney's going, oh, what did we do? We need to have one of these. But the other thing they did is they were also smart in going, this is not the end all be all of our business, meaning we can't do this forever because these guys are going to get smart that we're just leveraging their content to build our whole platform and charge everyone $13 a month and make a lot of money. So let's start, now that we have people's trust that we've put a lot of good stuff on here, let's start making stuff. Let's hire really good producers. Let's do that. House of Cards was the first thing on there that was like
House of Cards.
David Fincher to make a TV show, and everyone was like, wow, this is great. Ended up historically not a great look, but that's not because of Fincher. But
Yeah.
yeah. So and then they say we have to start. All right, that's phase one. Get a bunch of good stuff on the platform. And phase two is let's start making our own stuff because we're going to start losing. Now Disney's all on Disney Plus. WB's all on HBO Max. ESPN has ESPN Plus. So eventually all of this is going to whittle away. And if we don't produce some great stuff, and they've done it, they've thrown a ton of money at it, movies and television. And it's now they have their own, they are now fully a media company making stuff as opposed to just buying stuff already made.
Right. Yeah. House of Cards. I mean, Kevin Spacey hasn't aged well, but man, that show
Yeah.
at the time was like, I mean, it certainly like blew me away. I remember being a teacher at Byron Nelson and like downloading that on my lunch break and like watching it and being like, oh my gosh, this is this is like HBO level. And I'd always thought of Netflix as the kind of the dumb stuff that they were getting at low costs or whatever. And I didn't realize that they'd come in like, so what should, if you're an executive for Netflix, what are you worried about? What's your potential threat? I mean, everybody seems to be streaming these days, right? So like, what are you worried about?
I remember Ted Sarandos, I think is how you say it, Sarandos, whatever runs Netflix. And he said, he had a really interesting line a couple years ago. I thought was really smart. It kind of showed the way he thinks. And this, keep in mind, it's a couple years ago, so I don't know if this is still a good reference. But they asked him, "What are you worried about Disney Plus? Are you worried about HBO Max? Are you worried about all this stuff?" He said, "No, a bit, of course, but right now I'm just obsessed. I'm really worried about Fortnite." And like that's a really interesting thing to say because he's thinking about it as I'm in the business of eyeballs, right. And I can't think of it just streaming content people like me. I have to think about how do I get the kid that likes to watch YouTube tutorials and Twitch and video games and sports and all this stuff. How do I compete with all of this to get my share of the eyeballs? Because every eyeball that's on Fortnite is not watching House of Cards. And so I think they've got the early adopter rule. I think they're pretty safe in the streaming world. I think what Disney's doing is probably because what that studio can just produce is probably a little scary, but Netflix is really well positioned I don't think they'll ever be 50% of the streamers will be on Netflix like it used to be, but I think they'll always be. I think this will kind of tier out to a Netflix, HBO Max, and Disney and Amazon Prime as like the big four, and then the Paramount and the Peacock and Hulu and things like that, kind of the little brothers underneath that. But I think Netflix will be number one for the foreseeable future.
I mean, those are three pretty big competitors. Amazon, Apple, Disney. I mean, those are like the heavyweights of just industry in general. I mean, unless Facebook came out with some sort of streaming service, or like the big, or Google came out with one, right? It's like Google does, they have YouTube. So you're like, I mean, they're not facing the little guys anymore. I feel for them because I know they're a powerful company and all of that, but then again, they're facing some pretty big giants. Now, my boys both loved Mandalorian. I just think it's a wonderful. Boba Fett, they've liked it. They just haven't been that excited about it. Is Disney still? Are they still being able to create the content? I know they're doing some of the Marvel stuff and all that stuff, but what do you think they're doing best?
Yeah, I mean, to your last point, really quickly, the advantage Netflix has though is that their core business is streaming.
Right.
Whereas Apple, it's like 2% of their business. Amazon, it's like 1% of their business. Disney, it's kind of part of their overall media thing. And Netflix is like, we do this. So while those companies are bigger, they really have that niche. But to your point on Disney, what Disney's done really well is what they do exceptionally well across everything. It's synergy. So this show on Disney Plus leads into this movie, Spider-Man, which leads to this theme park ride for you to go see. And you just follow that funnel all the way. By the way, across that funnel, you're going to give us $400 as you buy all this stuff, goes into the merchandise. And so leveraging what they have, which are the only real, like, again, monoculture things we have anymore, where everyone at least has kind of a passing familiarity with it, is Marvel and Star Wars, probably to a lesser extent, but like everyone kind of knows Marvel. I mean, movie theaters, people post-COVID, no one can get anyone to go to movie theater, but when Spider-Man comes out, we all go, right? But that is, everyone was like, good trend for movie theaters. And then the next three movies that came out just ate it. It's not a trend. Like, they are a complete aberration. They are, completely on their own in that way. So what Disney does well is really leveraging all of that to a cohesive thing. And then, getting kids hooked, what parent of a child under the age of 8 won't pay for Disney Plus because it's
No.
the only place you can get this 70 years of Disney movies and Pixar movies and Marvel movies and Star Wars movies, and so they
Right.
have
Right.
basically especially for children, like they've got the corner. And so, yeah, Disney does a lot of things really well, but I think the cohesion across all their different brands, I think they do the best.
I'll tell you what, my boys are still and my daughter too, anytime it's a streaming time, it's either YouTube or it's
Yeah.
Netflix. They still, I mean, they'll go to Disney to get something that's rare that they haven't seen before. But it's interesting that how just Netflix still continues to be there. It is Amazon Prime. I know they're not, their core business is not TV,
Yeah.
but man, when you got a war chest of money and you can go buy directors. I mean, I'm right now watching Underground Railroad, incredible show.
Yeah.
Like,
Coastal Redhead, yeah.
they can just put money at things that are incredible projects, and they don't care if it makes money or not. They just want to provide content, which to some people, by the way, for years didn't even know they had Amazon
Yeah.
Prime because they had the subscription, didn't know they had video though.
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing. That Amazon Prime has the least amount of unsubscribes because no one gets rid of Prime because you need it for all
Right.
the other things, right? So that's it. Yeah, they're starting to. They're doing the most expensive show ever this year, which is a Lord of the Rings show. It's like a $2 billion show there, but it's
Right.
a crazy amount of. We'll see. I mean, it's all about kind of capturing that cool feeling as a brand. I don't think Amazon's really done that yet. They've done better in films. Like they'll go to the film festivals and just like buy 3 movies that are going to be Oscar contenders, and that's great, and put them on streaming.
Right.
So they've built a nice back catalog. But yeah, I mean, it comes down to who are the people working at these companies? What is their taste? Yes, Amazon has all the money in the world and Disney has a ton of money and all these things. But if the people making these decisions on these shows and movies are not smart, then it doesn't matter. You can spend
Yeah.
however much. If that Lord of the Rings show is bad, which I don't think it will be, but if it's
Right.
bad, then who cares that they spent $2 billion on it? So or if it's good and no one cares to watch it for whatever reason. So I think Netflix has done a good job transitioning to a media company. Like you said, HBO is really strong in that high end tastemakers things that they do. Netflix has done a good job at doing that and others. They can cater to the low, middle, and highbrow
Right.
with different shows on their thing. They're very diversified that way, and they just put out so much, both original and purchase. They just put out so much stuff.
And
They're just trying to win with quantity, just flood the
yeah.
wave.
And they just pray for that one big hit. I mean, they
Absolutely.
got a couple of them every year where it's like, well, you've got to watch, you got to subscribe, you got to watch this thing. Like, but I don't know if anybody who cancels their Netflix account, like that seems like when I cancel my HBO account here and there, but I just never cancel my Netflix account. I guess because it's so inexpensive and they have so much content, but I will tell you, Brian mentioned to me on your podcast the other time where he was talking about the guy who watches Apple Plus, and that's this guy. Man, I love the morning show. I'm sorry. I know you guys are not fans, but I love the morning show. I love Ted Lasso.
Yeah, sure.
I love C. I'm not a Momoa guy. I know Brian's a huge Momoa guy. That's not my guy, but there these different shows. I loved Mr. Corman. I thought it was great. Foundation, not so great. Coda was incredible. So many of these shows I really loved. And I don't know. I think you're right. They are storing a lot of money at it. Can Apple make it? Is Apple going to make it as a major streamer?
Yeah. Look, we talked about it when they launched it. You just have to. The thing about being a streamer, and they're perfectly positioned for this, is you have to be patient, because especially as a company that's not used to making content. Again, they're used to making hardware and software. You're figuring out who to hire to run these divisions, who to have approved different shows, whatever, and that's going to be 5 years of like ups and downs. Ted Lasso is a big hit. That's a surprise hit, I think, for that network. Morning show is probably a little disappointing, not as whether it's good or bad or not, but in terms of its like kind of penetration of the culture, awards winning, things like that. I think they really expected that to be. But that's the kind of lessons that you just have to learn over 5 years. Who approved Ted Lasso? Okay, you now run our comedy department, right? I mean, it's just like any company. You just have to figure out who's smart and pay them and keep them and all that. And so, yes, they'll be successful because Apple has trillions of dollars in the bank. They're the biggest market capital company in the world,
right?
And so they can afford to lose money on Apple TV for, I don't know, 100 million years. And as long as they're interested in doing it, they'll do it. So by that, I mean, they're going to find good producers. They're going to pay them very well. They're going to figure out what their brand is. Right now, it's a little scattershot, right? It's like kind of prestige movies for dads that have Tom Hanks in them and Ted
Hey,
Lasso and things like that. But they're
I
going to
like those movies.
No, me too. Me too. So do I. But I'm saying like they're going to, HBO has a very distinct, you kind of know HBO show right away. I think in 5 years, you'll know an Apple show when you see it. It's just, they're going to take some lumps and they don't even care right now about subscriber numbers. They give it away when you get a phone, they're just trying to build a content library and just, have a reason, just kind of diversify their business a bit. And, but yeah, they'll be fine.
I mean, they got Jennifer Aniston, they've got Reese Witherspoon, they've got Steve Carell. The morning show lineup of actors in that show is unbelievable. And I thought the storyline was incredible cliffhangers, incredible show. Yeah. Why didn't that show pierce the vernacular of most streamers? Is it because they don't have access to Apple Plus? Do you feel like it just didn't appeal to a lot of people? What was it?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people tried it out. Wasn't for them tonally for whatever reason. And yeah, I think a lot of people just don't. I don't think a ton of people. It's kind of at the same phase, I think, with where Amazon Prime was 8 years or 5 years ago, where people have it, don't even know they have it. For whatever reason. But yeah, I mean, and those kind of shows, those prestige shows, with the exception, there's one key exception, Yellowstone. Those shows are really graded by how many awards they win. And that didn't win any awards, right? And so that's what they want. They're going to spend money on it to get trophies. Yellowstone is like completely its own thing for whatever reason. Tons of people watch it. I mean, it's a good show, but I mean, it kind of is like this relic of a bygone era. But the reason you make a Succession or a morning show or all these kind of expensive prestige dramas is to get trophies. And it didn't get trophies. At least maybe season 4 of it will kill. And that'll be worth it to them. But yeah.
Yeah.
And that's also how people defined it. They go, okay, Jennifer Aniston just won an Emmy for that. I'll check that show out. I mean, that's what happened with Lasso. I mean, that show had a good audience, but when they basically swept I think it was the first COVID Emmys, either that or the Golden Globes. Yeah. They went out, they had like 1 million streams the next day because people were like, okay, what is this? This looks fun. Yeah.
I have Apple Plus and I didn't even check it out. It was my wife who was like, you have got to watch Ted Lasso because I'm a soccer guy. She's like, so I'm like, all right, whatever, watch this. I mean, great show. I mean, just so funny. And it was such a great first season. Second season was really good too, but first season was just, iconically good. What would you say, what is Hulu's role? Where are they at now? What are they the most relevant streaming service that we haven't really talked about?
Yeah, they have a really interesting story. So they were started as like a mix. It's so funny, like these decisions these people made. Hulu started as like, it was, I may not have the exact percentages correct, but it was like they were a co-venture between Disney, NBC, which is Comcast at the time, and Fox, 20th Century Fox, to compete with Netflix. Let's throw all of our shows kind of half streaming network, half on demand service where you can like watch last night's Jimmy Fallon and a Hulu show. And let's all kind of pool our resources into this and fight against Netflix. Well, an interesting thing happened in the last couple of years that Disney bought 20th Century Fox. Yeah. Fox spun out into basically like a News Corp subsidiary that just runs like news and things like that. So Disney bought 20th Century Fox, which was their production arm, all the like X-Men property, all that stuff. And then they also got the 25% share of Hulu. So now my point is now Disney owns half of Hulu. I think the future of Hulu is, you may remember this in the 90s, there was a big studio called Miramax.
Yeah.
And Miramax was just Disney. And it was just, Disney didn't want to make R-rated Disney movies, but they wanted to make good R-rated movies like Good Will Hunting or things like that. So they kind of spun up this studio called Miramax that they were, they could make all the money off the movies, but it didn't say, there wasn't the castle with Tinkerbell swimming around and then a really graphic, violent movie or something. Right. So I think Hulu, if I were to guess, becomes the streaming production arm for stuff that's not quite kid friendly that Disney's making.
Okay. Interesting. Is there any other streaming services that you think are going to be incredibly relevant with these current ones that have a chance to be like big?
I think, man, it's hard. It's like Paramount Plus, for example, this venture of Viacom. They did their biggest hit on any Paramount network is Yellowstone.
It's an incredible show.
Yeah, but for you can't get on Paramount Plus
Right.
because they sold it to their rival Peacock before there was a Paramount Plus. And so now you can watch new episodes of Yellowstone on the Paramount Network, which is not on Paramount Plus, but all your old ones you have to go to Peacock to watch. They'll figure those things out. Time, those contracts will end and things like that. I think they have an interesting chance. Paramount Plus, it's a great app. I don't know if you've used it. I use it in Champions League a lot. It's a beautiful app. And they have some hits on there now. There's that Jeremy Renner show is pretty big. They'll get Yellowstone at some point. They'll incorporate the Showtime component, I think, at some point. That one could be interesting because like CBS, Viacom, all that that has MTV, it has Comedy Central.
Yeah.
I think that they have like a South Park deal now they're pushing with that. So they're interesting. Peacock has they have Premier League, so I use it for that for soccer, but they also have all the NBC properties. So they've got The Office now, the Parks and Rec. So basically everything was kind of those NBC comedies are all there. So that has a really wealth of content. It is a terrible app. I don't know if you've used Peacock. It's the worst app I've ever done. These things are fixable. They're easier to fix than bad content decisions, but it is a nightmare in terms of user experience, but they'll figure that out. Those two, because of the legacy brands they have, they know how to develop shows. I wouldn't be surprised if they get some hits going. They're never going to be Netflix, but I think those two are interesting ones to watch.
Richard, man, we appreciate you so much for coming in and talking to our class today. You have been fantastic.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Hope it wasn't too boring for you, and it's an interesting world. And I think to be young and interested in this is a good thing because there's a lot of money out there in this business, and there's a lot of opportunity because things are changing constantly. So if you're interested in this, there's a lot of books and great things about the changing media culture that we have. Not since like radio to television has there been this much change in such a short period of time. So enjoy it and learn about it and appreciate it. And everything Mr. Simpson does for you is great, I'm sure.